Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea projecting an additional 4,000 new COVID-19 cases on Wednesday. Antiviral treatments due to arrive soon. Officials to announce how and when they'll be distributed. The US condemns North Korea's latest missile launch and again urges the regime to return to talks. The head of the UN expresses his deep concern over the second provocation in less than a week. Plus, the World Bank cuts its projection for global growth in 2022 to 4.1%. However, it warns an uncontrolled spread of Omicron could erode that figure even further.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on January 12 here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We start, though, with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. The daily caseload is expected to jump on this Wednesday, as we usually see an increase in the number of new cases in the middle of the week.
And also today, authorities plan to announce details on how Pfizer's COVID-19 oral treatment will be used in the country. For more on this and other updates, our Choi Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
Let's start with a local situation. How many cases are we expecting today?
Well, we're expecting today's caseload to surpass the 4,000 mark today. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Tuesday, South Korea reported more than 3,700 cases. It's around 1,000 cases more than the day before, but as always, the increase is mainly due to the weekend effect. We're also seeing an increasing number of cases from overseas, and with fears over the inflow of Omicron variant, authorities are reviewing ways to strengthen antivirus measures for inbound travelers. And stronger measures may mean stronger inspections to filter out anyone who does not meet the travel requirements. Right now, travelers must take PCR tests prior to departing and prove that they have tested negative to board flights to Korea.
And Min-jung, Pfizer's oral treatments are due to arrive in South Korea very shortly indeed. We hear that there is going to be an announcement very soon about how and when they will be distributed.
Right. In the coming hours, authorities will be announcing the further details on how Pfizer's COVID-19 oral treatment, Paxlovid, will be used in the country. During the briefing, officials will announce the details on who will be receiving the pills, and they will also explain how the medicine can be prescribed and administered. The government has secured enough oral treatments for more than 1 million people, of which 760,000 will be Pfizer's and the rest MSD's. The first shipment, enough to cover 20,000 people, will arrive at Incheon Airport on Thursday at noon. And it's widely anticipated that the pills will be distributed for use as early as this Friday. Those first in line to receive the medicine are people being treated at home and at residential treatment centers. Among these patients, priority would most likely be given to seniors aged 65 and over and those with weak immune systems. And this is mainly because they are at higher risk of becoming severely ill. And just to recap, Pfizer's Paxlovid was given the green light for emergency use by the country's drug agency in late December, while molnupiravir developed by MSD is still under review.
Right, well, let's hope that this could become a game changer that could improve the current situation. But moving on to vaccinations, Min-jung, I hear that another vaccine could be granted approval today.
Right, Mo-gan, we're still waiting to see whether the vaccine developed by U.S. drug maker Novavax will get approval for use in the country. The announcement will be made this afternoon after the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety finishes their review this morning. Novavax's vaccine has been developed using a more traditional method also used to develop influenza vaccines. So watchers say there are fewer concerns about side effects and storage is relatively easy. South Korea has secured 40 million doses of the vaccine, and once given the green light, authorities will use them to administer shots to unvaccinated people.
Okay, so some encouraging news in terms of treatments and vaccinations. We've also been seeing this recent downtrend in the number of new cases in South Korea. Does this suggest we might see a revision of the social distancing guidelines?
Right, authorities will be announcing new social distancing measures this Friday, and many are expecting the authorities to ease the current restrictions. But with the spread of the Omicron variant, it is difficult to expect an easing of restrictions equivalent to the first stage of the country's gradual return to normal scheme. Back in November, under the first stage, most venues could open 24 hours, and the social gathering cap was 10 in the capital region and 12 elsewhere. But since mid-December, restrictions meant many businesses had to close by 9 p.m., with social gatherings limited to a maximum of 4 people. So realistically speaking, watchers say it would be reasonable to find a middle ground somewhere in between, perhaps increasing the current social gathering cap to 6 to 8 people and extending business hours to midnight. But for now, we will have to wait until Friday for further details.
All right, Min-jung, as always, thank you so much for your report. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to the worldwide effect of COVID-19, the World Health Organization says more than half of Europe's population will be infected with the Omicron variant of COVID-19 within the next several weeks.
And in China, a third city has been completely locked down after 2 cases of Omicron were confirmed in the urban area. Kim Hyo-sun has this report.
The WHO is warning that half of everyone in Europe will be infected with the Omicron variant of COVID-19 within 2 months. The organization says the variant is quickly becoming the dominant virus in Western Europe.
The Omicron variant represents a new west to east tidal wave sweeping across the region on top of the Delta surge that all countries were managing until late 2021.
It says the agency's projection was based on the 7 million new cases reported across Europe during the first week of 2022. Many European countries are reporting record-high daily COVID-19 tallies, with the new cases on Tuesday totaling over 360,000 in France. That beats the previous record of just over 330,000 recorded last Wednesday. France's health minister is asking the public to stay vigilant.
However dizzying this situation could be, it requires a cool head and for us to take responsibility to continue the management of this unprecedented epidemic that has been going on for nearly 2 years.
Italy is also grappling with a rapid surge, recording over 220,000 new cases on Tuesday. Its health ministry said the daily tally of COVID-19 related deaths rose to 294, the highest in around 8 months. In the U.S., the average number of daily cases during the past week was over 750,000, roughly tripling from 2 weeks ago. The country logged nearly 1.48 million new infections on Monday, recording a fresh new high as the Omicron sweeps across the U.S. The surge has also pushed COVID-19 hospitalizations to record levels, putting a strain on the country's healthcare system. In China, Anyang has become the country's third city to lock down its residents because of an outbreak. Authorities announced a lockdown of the city, home to some 5.5 million people on Monday, after identifying 2 cases of Omicron. Residents are not allowed to go out, and stores have been ordered to shut, except those that sell necessities. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The American Red Cross has declared a national blood crisis for the first time in the organization's history, as blood drives have been canceled due to the pandemic and fewer people are donating. According to the organization Tuesday, many blood banks in the U.S. have under a day's supply of some blood types, adding that some days it can't fulfill all the requests it receives from hospitals. The Red Cross is urging anyone who can donate to do so, but says O positive and O negative are needed the most, along with platelet donations.
North Korea claims the missile it fired on Tuesday was also of the hypersonic variety, calling it a successful final test firing of this particular missile type. The North state-run daily, the Nodong Shinmun, said Wednesday that the missile hit a target 1,000 kilometers off the coast. Watching in person, Kim Jong-un reportedly praised the success of the regime's missile development. He said it was the key to the North's 5-year plan to develop defense, science and weapons systems. The missile also appears to have as you can see on the screen there, a cone-shaped warhead like the one the North launched last week. The international community was quick to react to North Korea's missile launch. The US, as you might expect, condemned it, but stressed Washington wants the regime to return to negotiations. The head of the United Nations also expressed his deep concern. Kim Da-mi with this report.
The U.S. has condemned North Korea's latest missile launch, calling on the regime to engage in sustained and substantive dialogue. This from White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki in a press briefing on board Air Force One en route to Atlanta on Tuesday. While noting the North's military activity did not pose an immediate threat to U.S. personnel or territory or allies, she did underline that such moves are a threat to the international community. Calling Tuesday's launch a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions, the U.S. official added Washington will continue close cooperation with its allies. Takeoffs from some western U.S. airports were temporarily halted for 15 minutes following the North's missile launch. While the Federal Aviation Administration said the agency regularly takes precautionary measures, Psaki said the unusual delay came out of an abundance of caution. A UN spokesperson also says Secretary General Antonio Guterres is very concerned by the North's missile launch, urging the regime to comply with all relevant Security Council resolutions.
As we've said again, we are convinced and believe that diplomatic engagement is the only way to reach a sustainable peace and a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Japan also shared their regret.
North Korea had just recently launched a ballistic missile, and the United Nations Security Council had just held discussions on how to respond to it. Under these circumstances, it is very regrettable that North Korea continues to launch missiles.
But China maintained its long usual stance that all parties should not rush into judgment nor overreact to the North's activity.
We hope that all parties will be cautious in their words and deeds, jointly maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
He then added that China has always believed that any action taken by the UN Security Council should be to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and help respective parties to resume dialogue. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The World Bank has forecast global economic growth to slow to 4.1% this year, down 0.2 percentage point from its earlier estimate in June. The Washington-based institution warned Tuesday that the world's economy is entering a, quote, pronounced slowdown due to the new threats of COVID-19 variants as well as inflation. It explained Omicron could even further erode global growth to 3.4%. The World Bank also said growth will slow further to 3.2% in 2023.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now in the era of COVID-19. Most economists have found it difficult to make solid predictions about what will happen in the months to come. However, it must be said that more and more of them are feeling slightly more upbeat about 2022 than they have over the past couple of years, but numerous uncertainties remain beside the pandemic, lockdowns and the threat of new variants emerging. There's inflation, the Federal Reserve lifting rates and ending its bond buying program, supply chain disruptions, as well as geopolitical tensions, including those between the US and China and the US and Russia.
Well, that's just to name a few. So how much of a stress test is 2022 going to put on the world economy? For the answers to some of these questions, we connect to Song Su-young, professor of economics at Chungang University. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
So what do you think are the three biggest risks to the global economy this year, and do governments have the tools to deal with them if they emerge?
Yeah, several factors are offered as a potential threat, threatening candidates to the global economy. Even though the threatening factors are of the same origin, that could each could have a different magnitude of impact on the different countries. For example, in Europe, Ukraine's situation will be an imminent threat and could be developed into huge turmoil. As for the Korean economy, I think the biggest threat is the escalated political tension to devastate the economic recovery, particularly between China and the U.S. On the island of Taiwan. And the next one is elongated lockdown and the continued supply disruption due to the outbreak of a vaccine-resistant new corona variants. And also, slow growth and the sharp declines in inflation in the second half of the 2022. Currently, the soaring inflation would be a matter of issues, but in the second half, I expect a declining of inflation, and the biggest risk is we may return to the pre-pandemic secular stagnation situation with too low growth and too low inflation. So this kind of fluctuation of the inflation and the economic situation would be most serious potential threat against for the recovery of the economy for the upcoming year of 2022.
Now, Professor, some economists are really concerned about the effect that Fed's rate liftoff might have on emerging economies like South Korea, as they can lead to massive capital outflows. Just how vulnerable would you say the South Korean economy is in this situation?
Yeah, soaring inflation and some sudden hike of interest rates by the Federal Reserve Board in the U.S. would be maybe a main culprit to cause this kind of problem. That is, the flight to quality could cause a massive outflow of foreign capital. But, however, South Korea had already experienced such an ordeal 25 years ago in the year of 1996, and we had successfully won through by the year of 2003. So currently, above all, South Korea is not anymore counted as an emerging market currently, And I think we are most unlikely to be vulnerable to such a situation because our government has already a liquidity swap contract with the Federal Reserve of the U.S. and also FEMA, the Foreign Investment Monetary Authority, Foreign and International Monetary Authority repurchase account in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. So to that regards, I don't expect such experience, and we are not anymore vulnerable to such a situation. So anyway, the Federal Reserve terminate bond buying stimulus plan as early as by the mid-March in this year, and then the interest hike could cause a trouble for some emerging economies, such as South Africa, Argentina, and Turkey. These countries have a very huge debt from the foreign capital. So to that regard, they are mostly concerned about this interest hike.
Now, Professor, the past few years have been marked by sporadic economic setbacks caused by the pandemic variants, COVID-19 variants, rather. Now, heading into 2022, do you think these risks have been mitigated thanks to vaccinations and new antiviral treatments and a lower mortality rate?
Yeah, but as I'm not an oral expert in these and in disease and the medical issues, but all I can say is I just trust the opinion of some experts and the pathologists. I hope all the people fully vaccinated, and I mean all globally, and herd immunity to become effective. So far as I'm concerned, experts have been warning that if the pandemic is allowed to rage again in some less developed countries, particularly in Africa, and then it could spread out around the world, and we could see emergence of a vaccine-resistant COVID variants that may result in a return to lockdown and further disruption of the supply around the world. So it could have a really serious impact. The IMF chief economist, Zita Gopinath, in last October, she has mentioned that without successful blocking of the spread of the coronavirus, that could have a 40% of the, unless a 40% population around the world is not fully vaccinated, then it could have a really serious impact on the economy. So that's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to finish on too much of a grim note. What do you think are some of the bright spots the world economy might be able to look forward to, something we desperately need in 2022?
Yeah, just the opposite of what I have just mentioned. So the resolution of the political tension between U.S. and Russia, and particularly for Korea, South Korea, what is of importance lies between the removal of the trade dispute and the tension between China and the U.S. And those are most imminent and very threatening geopolitical problems for the recovery of the economy. And then the other thing is, once the vaccines are fully deployed, and then as long as the coronavirus has been contained and controlled, we can look forward to the surge of the recovery of the economy, and the we can have a very bright prospect for the upcoming years.
Right. Let's hope for that too. Now, that was Song Soo-young, professor of economics at Chungang University, on the outlook for the global economy in 2022. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
South Korea's National Assembly on Tuesday held its first plenary session of the year. Lawmakers approved legislation mandating workers' representation on the boards of directors in the public sector, as well as increasing the number of overseas polling stations, as well as other things as well. Our Lee Kyung-eun with the details.
Public institutions in South Korea would now be required to include on their board of directors a member who represents workers. On Tuesday, the National Assembly passed a law that gives workers the right to vote for board-level representatives. Usually, board members are made up of internal executive directors who are part of the company, and outside non-executive directors who are not part of the company and who monitor the board from the stakeholders' perspective. They together are in charge of policy making. In case of the public sector, those members have been appointed by the president or by ministers. But with the new law, there must be an additional member directly chosen by a workers' vote. Many countries in the European Union already have some form of this system, often called co-determination. In South Korea, it was first adopted by the Seoul city government in 2016 and has since been expanded to 9 local governments. Within 6 months of the law taking effect, the system will be applied to a total of 130 institutions, including public enterprises. This comes as the presidential candidate for the ruling Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, demanded the parliament swiftly pass the legislation, and it picked up momentum with the main opposition People Power Party's Yoon Suk-yeol also expressing support, leading to unanimous approval at a prior standing committee. While the law is largely welcomed by labor groups who say it will enhance management transparency and fairness, it's opposed by local business circles who fear its expansion into the private sector, potentially hampering swift decisions. Meanwhile, ahead of the overseas voting period, lawmakers have passed a law that increases the number of polling booths abroad. By lowering the minimum requirement to areas where at least 30,000 South Korean nationals live, and allowing up to 3 booths to be set up per consulate or embassy. So this time there will be 221 in total with an additional 15. The voting period can also be extended in an emergency. These will affect some 230,000 overseas Koreans who signed up to vote in the presidential election. Young-eun, Arirang News.
Now, it's been about 5 months since South Korea became the first country to enact a law challenging the big global tech giants on their App Store billing policies. Google has already started to comply, allowing app developers to charge customers using other billing systems. Now, Apple has decided to comply as well and will be working on a solution with local authorities. Kim Sang-min with this report.
Apple has decided to ban rather than break. The tech giant will now offer alternative payment systems on its App Store in South Korea. This is to comply with a new local law restricting App Store operators from forcing developers to use their own in-app payment systems. Here's how Apple's in-app payment systems have been working so far. If a customer bought an app from Apple's App Store, the firm took a service charge of up to 30%, leaving developers with only 70% of the purchase price. This was a great cash cow for Apple, with industry watchers estimating that the firm earned up to $25.7 billion globally with the service charge last year. But South Korea's new law, which went into effect last September, prevents App Store operators like Google and Apple from forcing their in-app billing policies on developers. This made South Korea the first country to introduce such curbs on global tech giants' in-app payment systems amid growing international scrutiny on the issue. Google was first to ban providing an alternative payment system with a lower service charge on its App Store in South Korea since December. And Apple decided to follow the move to comply with the Korea Communications Commission, giving an alternative payment system at a reduced service charge. Exactly when the system will come into effect is yet to be revealed, though the company said it plans to discuss this further with the KCC. Apple said in its statement that it is looking forward to working with the KCC and its developer community to find a solution that benefits Korean users. This sets a precedent that might affect not just South Korea but other countries as well, and all eyes are now on how other countries will change their own policies. Kim Sang-min, Arirang News.
And now we cross over to our Ussr for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thank you. It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Now, amid high tensions over Ukraine, officials of the United States and Russia wrapped up their first round of crisis talks after 7 hours on Monday. Late last year, Russia began militarizing along its border with Ukraine and spelled out demands for changes to the regional security order, including stopping NATO's expansion eastward. There's been great uncertainty as well over the last few days over how the West should respond to Mr. Putin's demands, and Monday's meeting has ended with no breakthrough, according to US media. Also, there's been uncertainty over how the recent riots in Kazakhstan that the Russian military stepped in to intervene will affect the regional dynamics. With further meetings between Russia and NATO countries scheduled in Geneva this week, we discussed today how the talks might proceed. For this, we connect with Ambassador William Courtney, an adjunct senior fellow at RAND Corporation. He was the United States ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia and has also served as the US Soviet Nuclear Testing Commission. Very warm welcome to you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And well, first of all, Ambassador, we really want to hear your reaction to the US-Russia talks that was held in Geneva on Monday. They spoke for almost 8 hours, didn't they? But why didn't they have any outcomes?
The demands that Russia has made are so sweeping, if you will, virtually outlandish, that no one really expected much progress. The United States did offer to discuss medium-range missiles, limits on those, and confidence-building measures that could affect the size or transparency of military exercises. Both of those issues go back to previous treaties Soviet treaties and Russian treaties that were negotiated many years ago. Unfortunately, the Russians violated the INF, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and the U.S. withdrew from that. So there is possibility to go back and make some progress there. But there's no possibility of NATO ending its open door policy or of NATO removing military infrastructure from its new members, which the Russians have demanded.
And of course, the Russians have demanded some sort of security guarantee. What is the significance of a security guarantee being discussed by the two sides?
There is no real discussion of a security guarantee. The West is not in a position to offer a security guarantee. NATO itself involves security guarantees among the members, but a guarantee to Russia that NATO will never expand into Ukraine, for example, the Ukraine or Georgia would never become a member, would be contrary to longstanding NATO policy. I'm not sure why the Russians pushed this issue this time this hard. It's possible that Russia is concerned now that Ukraine has moved so far and so fast to Europe that civil society in Belarus wants to do the same thing. That Russia is concerned that Ukraine and Belarus, which are the two other East Slavic societies beyond Russia, that both of them may drift away from Russia and toward Europe. And I think that's the larger concern the Kremlin has.
And also, well, with the riots having taken place in Kazakhstan, there's been a lot of questions surrounding how Mr. Putin is going to react to this and how that might affect his approach to Ukraine. What is your view on this?
Putin was probably as surprised as anyone else that the sudden popular uprising occurred when it did over a fuel price issue in Western Ukraine in an area where workers are not paid well. It spread like wildfire, and these kinds of things happened before. For example, in 2018, a pension reform protest in Russia spread like wildfire. Well, this probably caused some concern in the capital of Kazakhstan because it wasn't clear if security forces would be totally loyal to the regime. There's been a lot of concern among Kazakhstanis about the stupendous wealth of the Nazarbayev family, and there's been concern about the renaming of the capital of the city after Nazarbayev. There's been small-scale unrest for a couple of years now, but nothing like this.
And it was quite shocking to see the Russian troops intervening really into Kazakhstan and with their president having called for help. And while the Kazakh president said that Russian troops are now set to go home in a couple of days because he says that the riot situation has largely stabilized with the troops having carried out these cleanup operations. There was a state of emergency and a nationwide curfew were put in place, and there were also reports of internet blackouts and media control. And, well, although the Kazakh president claims that the situation is under control, is that really the end of the matter, do you think?
Probably not. We're going to have to wait and see to what extent popular uprisings, which have spread across the country, will continue. With regard to the Russian troops, I think the real reason they're going home early is President Tokayev's inviting them in was very unpopular in Kazakhstan. There are a lot of nationalists in Russia who would like the northern regions of Kazakhstan to be annexed by Russia into Russia. So bringing in Russian troops is anathema to most Kazakhs. I think President Tokayev realized his mistake, and the Russians also don't want to create a situation in which Russian troops are shooting ethnic Kazakhs, because that would alienate Kazakhstan from Russia even greater. And up till now, Russia and Kazakhstan have had good relations, and the West has encouraged that.
Well, Kazakhstan, of course, was the last of the former Soviet Union states to declare independence in 1991, just a year before you were deployed there as the US ambassador. How do you assess the current power relations between Kazakhstan and Russia?
Russia has not worried so much about Kazakhstan as it has about Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine and Belarus border on the European Union. They are Europeans, countries, European peoples, and have been more pulled by the liberal and more prosperous lifestyles in Europe. That has not been so much of an issue in Kazakhstan, so they have maintained good relations. All the trade, transportation routes from Kazakhstan to the outside world go through Russia for the most part. Kazakhstan is the largest landlocked country in the world. I think in the future, whatever government comes to power in Kazakhstan, they will try to maintain good relations with Russia.
Well, the Kazakh president, Kasim Tokayev, he turned to the Kremlin for help, of course, with the recent riots. And, well, Mr. Tokayev said this week that Russia isn't going to stand for any revolutions in Kazakhstan. What do you make of this sort of comment that he made?
Well, President Putin has been against what are called color revolutions, of the kind that took place in Georgia and Ukraine, for example. He's been against those ever since they started. And when the Arab Spring came along, that increased concern in the Kremlin even more. The pension reform protests in 2018 in Russia, I think, threw a scare into the Kremlin. But the Kremlin really does not have the ability to prevent popular uprisings from emerging. So it will probably want to be careful in dealing with Kazakhstan, and the Kazakhstani leaders will also want to be careful in dealing with Russia. An additional factor is China. China is investing a lot of money in the Belt and Road Initiative, transportation routes through Kazakhstan, other kinds of investments. So Kazakhstan has to balance Russia, which has primarily political and security interests in Central Asia, and thus far China, which has primarily economic interests. So partly because of those two giant neighbors, Kazakhstan wants reasonably good relations with the West, with Europe, and with the United States. Probably a future government that comes to power in Kazakhstan is going to want to maintain that balance, what Kazakhstanis call multi-vector policy, and that is something that the West supports.
Oh, well, Mr. Putin has insinuated that the West was involved in the recent riots in Kazakhstan and, well, namely the United States. What do you make of these claims?
Oh, they're totally false. It's a standard Kremlin charge about everything that happens that is contrary to what the Kremlin favors. This is genuine popular uprising. These were striking workers who were protesting a doubling of the liquefied petroleum gas price, which they rely on for heating and for their cars. But the underlying conditions have been stupendous corruption and wealth by the ruling family, the Nazarbayev family. An enormous amount of money has been spent on a new capital, Astana, now called Nur-Sultan, and that has taken money away from other regions of Kazakhstan and taken money away from the working class of Kazakhstan. I think those underlying conditions are the main explanatory factors behind the current unrest.
And well, you mentioned Kazakhstan balancing relations with China, the US and Russia, and well, the US and Russia, of course, the United States, of course, has been very wary of China's growing military force and its weapons capabilities, particularly in recent months. And there's been a growing sense of urgency over arms control talks with the absence of the INF Treaty, which you, in the past, pointed out that the Russians had violated, and of course, this increasingly aggressive China. So at this point, what do you think could be achievable between Washington and Moscow in terms of arms control talks? And what kind of progress are you hoping to see in terms of engaging China in those talks as well?
So President Biden, as soon as he came into office, extended the New START treaty, which deals with long-range strategic weapons, nuclear weapons. And that has been extended for 5 years. So there's a little breathing room to negotiate. But what we're seeing from China now is that China traditionally has had what strategists call a minimum deterrence policy. China has not tried to match the numbers of nuclear weapons and nuclear delivery systems that Russia or the United States have had. But that's changed. Now China is embarked on a major nuclear modernization program. There's speculation in the West that China is abandoning the minimum deterrence policy and wants to come up somewhere in rough equality, perhaps with Russia and the United States. So this makes it more important for China to be involved in the next long-range strategic nuclear weapons negotiation. The United States has discussed this. Russia is kind of standing to the side, if you will, But I think the United States, Russia, and China, in the end, are probably going to have to come together in some kind of a negotiation.
Well, to be honest, many see Russia as a power that's in its twilight years, and it's perhaps trying to stay relevant by sparking these sort of provocations and making demands towards the West. What is your view? What do you think Mr. Putin really wants from the West?
So Mr. Putin wants a sphere of influence. He wants the ability to maintain a coercive sphere of influence, primarily with the republics that were former Soviet republics in his area, right around Russia. And especially the East Slavic countries, Belarus and Ukraine. The West, since World War II, the whole concept of coercive spheres of influence is something that the West and the international community generally have opposed. And other countries don't have that sort of thing. Russia and the Kremlin have, they're still back more in a 19th century mindset in terms of foreign policy and thinking that coercive spheres of influence are possible. I think as time goes on, we're going to see that the independence of the former Soviet republics, all of which in the last 30 years have maintained their sovereignty and independence, that there's going to be more respect for that in the future. But for the time being, Russia is probably pushing too hard, particularly against Ukraine. Russia's taking a chance by threatening to invade Ukraine now, and if it were to do that, the devastating financial consequences of sanctions could really harm the Russian economy. So I think the Kremlin is probably thinking twice about whether that might be a smart move.
And while the Russians have a list, they seem to know exactly what they want out of these talks. But the question is, does the US and European nations know what they want? How do you hope to see them approach negotiations in the coming weeks, especially with the NATO officials on Wednesday in Brussels meeting, with officials from NATO meeting their Russian counterparts later this week?
So the West has a pretty good concept of what it wants, and these are, as we discussed before, limits on medium range or intermediate range missiles in Europe, as well as confidence and security building measures to increase transparency around military exercises and reduce risks for those things. And again, those are issues that the Soviet Union and Russia have negotiated for many years, and we had agreements in those areas. Some of the confidence building agreements are still in place. Russia, though, has come to the table with really demands that are just pie in the sky, just beyond what can be achieved. So this is unusual. Russia knows how to do serious negotiations. In the strategic arms negotiations in the Iran nuclear agreement, Russia didn't issue demands that were totally unacceptable at the beginning of the talks. Rather, Russia approached those as serious negotiations. So it's a bit puzzling to the West why Russia has suddenly, at this point, come out with demands that it knows cannot be reached. So Russia's risking some humiliation, if you will, by proposing such demands, and then it's probably going to have to accept some, let's say, more modest achievements that are going to raise questions in the minds of some people why Russia behaved that way.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview today. That was Ambassador William Courtney, Adjunct Senior Fellow at RAND Corporation and former US Ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. Thank you very much, sir, for your time today.
You're quite welcome.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Hundreds of residents lost their homes on Monday after a massive fire ravaged a slum in northern Chile. At least 400 homes were affected by the fire, with residents left looking for their belongings in the debris where their houses once stood.
I got out of work early so I could come and salvage something, but I lost everything. I stand here wearing all I have left.
Fire quickly spread through the slum, known as Laguna Verde, as many of the houses there were built with wood. Despite the massive fire wiping out a large portion of the village, there has been no reports of fatalities or injuries. Locals living near a dam located in southeastern Brazil are now bracing for the possibility it will break its banks, as Pará de Minas in the Minas Gerais state has been experiencing heavy rain. With drone videos showing rushing water speeding through the Carioca Dam on Tuesday, local Mayor Elias Diniz cautioned that the region is on alert.
We remain on an alert level because of our city's dam. The Carioca Dam is compromised and has a chance of breaking.
The latest warning comes as heavy rain in the country also contributed to the tragic collapse of a canyon rock face in the state last Saturday, killing 10 people. Rainfall is expected to remain heavy throughout the week as residents are concerned the worst is still to come. Cambodia is mourning the loss of a local hero, but he's no human. He's Magawa, the landmine detecting hero rat who died at the age of 8 on Tuesday. The NGO that trained the hero rat is mourning the loss of one of its most successful landmine sniffers, adding that they are grateful for the incredible work he's done over the years. Magawa was an African giant pouch rat known for finding 71 landmines and 38 items of unexploded ordnance during his illustrious career. Looking back on his working life, Magawa's job title was Hero Rat, and he was awarded a gold medal by the UK-based veterinary charity PDSA in 2020 before retiring in June 2021. The rat was born and trained in Tanzania before his move to Cambodia in 2016. Cambodia has one of the highest number of mine amputees per capita in the world at more than 40,000. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Frigid temperatures to start off the day. Cold alerts have been expanded to more areas, and the regions under cold wave warning are seeing morning lows below -15 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, wet clouds continues to drop snow on Jeju and the west coast of Jeollado province, which will continue through the morning. But mountainous regions of Jeju and Ulleungdo, Dokdo will see heavy snow into tomorrow with up to 15 centimeters expected there. On the contrary, regions in the east will have intense dry weather. A freezing start for most regions. Even Busan is waking up to a low of -5 degrees Celsius. Gwangju is waking up to a low of -6 degrees. Highs will be similar to slightly higher than yesterday, meaning stay bundled up. Seoul and Chuncheon will go up to just -2 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Freezing weather stays through Friday before we get brief relief this weekend. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now, but we'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Thursday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Until next time, goodbye.
저는 메이저리그보다 태극마크를 단 마운드가 더 자랑스럽습니다. 내가 대한민국이다 라는 자부심이죠. 재외선거도 마찬가지죠. 대한민국의 내일을 내가 만들어 간다는 거 멋지지 않나요? 마치 가슴에 태극마크처럼 재외 유권자 여러분, 전 세계 어디서나 소중한 한 표 꼭 행사해 주세요. 여러분의 한 표가 바로 대한민국의 태극마크입니다. 아름다운 선거, 행복한 대한민국. 중앙선거관리위원회.
When the lantern of wisdom and mercy lights up, a traditional cultural festival unfolds. All hearts connect as one. The wave of tradition